On today's episode, I sit down with James Thomson. James is the founder of Buybox Experts, The Prosper Show. He's an advisor and investor to Scubana and is also an advisor to Heyday, among many others. A key point of the conversation we had today was all about his time at Amazon, where he spent 7 years building out multiple departments, working in the recruitment function and many, many others. Really fascinating, energizing conversation about hypergrowth, the approach to scale and data-backed decision-making on how to effectively compete for that billion-dollar idea. Things that are $100 million simply aren't interesting for Amazon. I took a lot from the conversation and really feel like anyone listening will probably draw some great insights as I did. I hope you enjoy. Hi, and welcome to Successful Scales, the show where I interview now successful professionals about their journey and try and garner insights onto any tips that can be applied to your business at home. Whether it's financial freedom or the exit of your company, wherever your journey may take you, the idea here is to simply learn from those who have done it before. I hope you enjoy and you get some value out of this. Buckle up and enjoy the episode. James, welcome to an episode of Successful Scales. Thanks for making the time and thanks for having such an incredible background that I get to enjoy this beautiful visual. Obviously your face, but obviously what's going on behind you.
Johnny, absolute pleasure to be joining you today. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would think of not very many people who are more worthy than you to talk about scale and about what it is to grow companies and be part of exponential growth and, sort of bestow upon that wisdom. So before we sort of dive into, some of your insights and your journey, well, let's dive into your journey first. I'd love to hear, for those who don't know, sort of your experience.
So I'm James Thomson. I am a by accident e-commerce entrepreneur. I never thought I was going to be an entrepreneur. I went the academic route many years ago and thought I was going to be a professor, and did all the training and did my MBA, did my PhD, and said, all right, let's go become an academic. And about 15 minutes into that experience, realized that maybe I was better suited as a consultant. Maybe I was better suited solving real world problems. And I mean that as no disrespect to academics. I come from a family of academics. I have a father and a brother who are academics and very successful. I just realized that I couldn't live in a world where there were 6 or 7 people who would be my editors, my reviewers, and they would control the world for me. I needed to be a little bit more free and be in a position where I could try a lot of new ideas out. So I did the normal things that people who have been classically trained in business do. I went off, I became a banker, I became a management consultant, and I became miserable because, quite frankly, the corporate world wasn't really the right kind of place for me. I did have an opportunity to go work at Amazon, which, although one might say that's a corporate world, I got to work there in 2007 to 2013, which was a time of insane growth. Significant new programs were being developed. I got to be part of some of those programs. And from the perspective of being in the safety of a corporate setting where you're getting your paycheck, you're getting your benefits, there's an office still there tomorrow, that part's all very rewarding. But at Amazon, I got to do something I never got to do anywhere else, which was work on problems that, quite frankly, every day seemed impossible to solve. And yet I knew that we would solve at least enough of the problem that we would figure out that maybe we were trying to solve for not quite the right problem, but we would accomplish major goals. And it's very exciting to be in a position where not only are you being challenged to find ways to create ridiculous levels of growth, but you're being asked to do it often with next to no resources. So you have to say, how do I beg, borrow, and steal resources? How do I get really creative about frugally finding ways to encourage my oh so kind colleagues to come and work a few hours on this project and lend their services and such? So I had the opportunity to work with the original FBA team at Amazon, figuring out how do we sell FBA into Amazon sellers. And that was I can tell a little bit more about that later, but that was a really crazy situation because Amazon didn't really know what FBA would encompass in terms of how they would position it to sellers. Obviously, here we are today, and sellers who want to be successful in third party with a few rare exceptions, they basically have to be using the FBA program. I used to take sellers on these tours of the fulfillment centers. And people would walk in and say, okay, your warehouse is bigger than my warehouse. I guess we'll use your warehouse. And in retrospect, I think back and I'm like, it's not about I have a bigger warehouse. It's that I have the ability to do things with this warehouse and this network of warehouses and the software that runs these warehouses, things that you'll never be able to do with your 50,000 square foot warehouse. So, no, that was kind of cool. Fast forward, I left Amazon in 2013, met my business partner, Joe Hansen. He and I have started a few businesses together. Some folks may be familiar with the Prosper Show, which is a large scale educational event that's held once a year for mid-size and large brands, primarily third-party seller brands. And then Joe and I also started an agency called Buybox Experts. Buybox Experts is now a 200-person agency working with brands, first-party, third-party, advertising, listings, all the stuff you would expect an Amazon agency to do. And talk about scaling. We've had to learn how to go from basically a hodgepodge of a collection of a few people who sort of knew bits and pieces of Amazon, plus Joe and myself, to now we have a team that has literally 15 or 16 different specialized sub teams, each of which are really, really strong at what they do. And we're able to now bring that expertise to brands. We didn't have a roadmap for how to scale. We kind of learned along the way. We certainly made more than our fair share of rather expensive mistakes in looking at how might we be able to get to be big and competent at the same time. And being big and competent at the same time while you're scaling. I mean, Yanni, I'm sure you know firsthand from your own businesses, how do you add more people, backfill the training and standardizing what it is they need to know and how they need to know it. Oh my gosh, those things are hard.
It breaks every other month.
There comes a point where you realize if we're going to do this, we need to be an adult type of company. We need to think about this beyond, hey, we're just some cool new startup in the internet space, to we need to create an environment and an infrastructure for our employees where they say, this is a real job. And when they explain to their parents they work for us, their parents say, you work for a real company. And so putting those two parts together, it took us many years to get to the point where we could afford to have certain types of benefit programs. We could afford to have a full-time recruiting person, a full-time administration person, full-time technology person. I mean, these are expensive investments, having these types of folks on the team. And yet the moment we added these types of people to our organizations, it became clear, oh, wait a minute. Yes, we now are in a much better position that we can add the next 30, 50, 80 employees because we've got people in place to handle these responsibilities full time. So it's very exciting to have that, but it's also scary because you're writing big checks to add new types of competencies to your organization. So being in a position where you realize we can't grow any further without making these investments, whether we want to or not. And now that we've made these investments, oh yes, I see that we can actually grow even faster than we anticipated because we've got competencies in these areas.
I have so many I'm sure you've seen me just writing down note after note after note here. I have so many questions. And like I said at the start, I feel like it's an absolute privilege to have you here because I know in this, I'm going to learn a lot, and those listening, I'm sure will too. But before I sort of dive into some of the more current experiences about growing Buybox Experts and, the Prosper Show and a lot of the stuff, I did my due diligence too and looked at a lot of the businesses that you're an advisor to and an investor to. I'm curious, from a personal perspective, you've been at Deloitte, you've been at BCG, Boston Consulting Group, you've been a consultant. You said that you plan to go down the academic route, and now you're finding yourself in, scaling startups to maturing companies. What's your key driver? Like, if you look at yourself and you say over the course of your career to date, and there's still a lot left to give in it, but, to date, looking back, what are the things that drive you? Is it well, you know what? I'm not going to put words in your mouth.
So it's really interesting. I went to work for one bank where it didn't take long for me to realize I was miserable, and I couldn't really figure out why I was miserable. I had a big P&L to manage. I had a team to manage. I had a nice office. I had a lot of work flexibility, but I was absolutely miserable. And I ended up with what is basically a life coach at the company who helped me understand what it is that makes me tick. And until you force yourself to sit down and ask those questions and realize, wait a minute, it's okay that these things make me tick. And in my situation with this particular organization, things that made me tick were not things that that organization could provide me. And the moment I realized that, oh gosh, I'm going to need to change jobs. Well, okay, that's annoying, but at least I understand what is it that I need to get out of my professional experience in order to be happy. If you think of the number of hours you're awake in a day and the proportion of those hours you spend on your work, if you're not happy doing whatever it is you're spending your time doing at work, I know it's work, it's not play, it's called work, but you still have to be motivated, be in a position where you say, this is worth doing, this is worth waking up for every day. And for me, coming to the point that I realized that I needed a job where I had certain types of intellectual flexibility, but I had the data to be able to provide insights into what it is that I ultimately was going to undertake, to be in a position where I had managers who weren't in a box, who had to do X, Y, and Z and do it only one particular way. I had been in many jobs where that was the situation. And as soon as this particular coach of mine, whose name is Rick Oslin, wonderful gentleman who still continues to be a very, very important guide for me, he helped me understand where the mismatch was. And as a result, the mismatch was so large that, of course, I was unhappy because I was trying to fit into an environment where things were being accomplished, success in how you accomplish things was not at all consistent with the way that I knew how to create success. So I ended up leaving that company and I went to work for Amazon, which was, quite frankly, a very fortunate chance situation that happened. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into when I went to work for Amazon. This is back in 2007. And quite frankly, Amazon is unrecognizable as a company today versus what it was in 2007. And I started at Amazon in early December 2007. And I remember the first day I started, as you can well imagine, Q4 at Amazon is insanity beyond insanity. And I walked in and my manager, who at the time was the director of the department, he sat me down. He said, here's your desk, here's your computer, here's your password and access to the Amazon data warehouse. We'll see you in a month. Not what's your job, what is it you're supposed to do in the next month, but basically, we don't actually have time to talk to you for the next month. So you figure out what you're going to do. And I'm literally like, okay, the bathroom's over there. The door out the building is there. What is it I'm supposed to do? I've never had this level of, minimal oversight. And yet I knew I had P&L responsibilities. So figuring out how do I make a job out of this so that not only do I appear to be competent, but I'm actually competent and actually happy doing what I'm doing. I mean, in retrospect, it's basically like handing your 8-year-old kid a set of kitchen knives and saying, there's the chicken, there are the sharp knives, make me an amazingly yummy meal. It's kind of like, this is insane. But as it turns out, that's the way things were done at Amazon. It might have a little bit more structure now, but I very quickly realized, okay, I can take the strengths of what I know how to do and I can apply them to this role and I can just start doing things. And I don't really have to ask a lot of permission. Just have to go do it. And as long as it's backed by data that I have pulled out of the data warehouse and looked at, and I'm testing against hypotheses, even if I step on someone's toes, if I've got the data to show what I've done, most of the time I can just keep moving forward. So there's an awful lot of asking for forgiveness, but in most organizations I'd worked in prior to that, there was no moving forward until you asked for permission 12 different ways before you could actually move forward. So it's a very strange mental shift to be in a situation where all of a sudden people are looking at you and saying, well, what problem have you solved today? Wow. Sorry, what problem did you want me to solve? Well, whatever problem needs to be solved. Well, what problem needs to be solved? Well, that's up to you to figure out what problem needs to be solved. And at the end of the day, the fundamental driver at Amazon is how do we keep scaling and how do we do it efficiently? I remember my first weekly business review at Amazon. Amazing experience to be in, where you realize everybody in the room has essentially been programmed in a certain way to think about what progress looks like. And I remember sitting in the meeting, and people were not talking about 20, 25% growth. You know, you work in a company that grows 20, 25% year over year. That's exciting. At Amazon, we were growing 3 to 4% a month. And so when I think back to my classic MBA training, where working in a growth environment and how do you think about growth, blah, 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 it was always around this framework of, you get to 8 to 10% year over year growth, you're in a growth organization. If you grew your business at Amazon 8 to 10%, people would laugh at you and you'd be replaced. And so the whole focus around, if you really want to scale your business, fundamentally, you need to understand what are the key drivers, the most important key drivers that are going to allow you to create 5-fold growth, 10-fold growth. And if you don't understand what those key drivers are, then it's going to slow you down from being able to grow. You can't just, well, let's try this, let's try that, let's try that. Yes, you can experiment in a bunch of different fronts, but you better be experimenting with a very clear set of hypotheses and some initial data that would suggest, I think going down this path is better than going down this path. Because if you get it wrong, you're going to have to course correct very quickly and start going down the correct path, because you're being asked to do 40, 50% year over year growth at a minimum. So this whole mindset, when I think of my time at Amazon, what I learned from that I've been able to take post Amazon, the most important issue is if something's worth doing, then for something to be worth doing, it basically means you're going to figure something out and then you're going to scale the heck out of it. You're going to say, all right, I have the secret sauce on how to go from A to B, but I can't just go A to B. I got to keep going in that direction as fast as I can. And I basically have to grab as much land as I can going in that direction. Knowing that it's going to work, I got to move as fast as I can. And at some point, I'll get diminishing returns. But if I just keep plodding along in this direction, saying, I have the formula of what I need to do, and I just keep moving at a fairly slow pace, then somebody else will figure out the same path and we'll end up, capturing the flag before I do. And so this concept of experiment, leverage data, make sure you make small course corrections if things aren't working. But then when you figure it out, you better move as fast as you can. You better scale as fast as you can. Granted, it'll create new problems for you. Like, we want to get at least 3 new clients a month. Whoa, now we want to get at least 30 new clients a month. Obviously being able to support the back end of what that justifies, there's a bunch of issues, but you need to ask yourself the question, if we know now how to add new clients, or if we know how to create new product listings, what would it take for us to be able to do 5 times that much? What would it take for us to do 10 times that much? Well, let's break the problem down. Let's figure out fundamentally what is holding us back and what would need to be true for that constraint to be removed. These are the types of questions I wish I had been asked to help think through when I was a business school student. When the professor said, congratulations, you're going to work for a growth-oriented organization. What does it take for you to grow your business 50% year over year? And again, another 50% next year and the next year. And by the way, it gets harder and harder. That 50% is a bigger number. So thinking about how do you break down this problem and how do you put yourself in a position where you're headed basically in the right direction and you can move as fast as you can, and then take that and go work at Amazon where somebody says, you need to figure out in what direction to go running. And by the way, we're not going to give you any resources to go figure it out. Until such time as you've proven you have a model that's highly scalable, you're not going to get any new resources. Once you prove it, I'll give you the resources. But until you prove that you're heading in the right direction, figure it all out on your own back.
Incredible just to sort of hear a little bit about 2007, walking to Amazon, giving that level of effectively autonomy without any clear direction. How much of that would you say is part of the culture at Amazon at the time? We can't talk about today necessarily, but at the time, how much of it was hiring the smartest person in the room or hyper intelligent people who are going to be extremely autonomous and giving them sort of that room to look at the data warehouse and understand what's happening versus was that you in a management position coming in? Like, is this something across the board, that's the talent we look for versus you in that position?
It took me a while to realize what was going on in terms of the types of people who were in the organization. And I ended up, one of the years I was at Amazon, I actually managed recruiting for the US Amazon Marketplace team. And I did so many interviews, it was absurd. But you very quickly realize there's an awful lot of people out there who have impressive looking resumes. They've worked for a lot of the big brand names. They've been there when important things happen, but it turns out they weren't the people that made these things happen. They got lucky. And there's a lot of lucky people, and luck is great. But when all you've done is you've been at big brand names long enough to put the brand name on your resume, it doesn't mean that you're the guy or you're the gal that's actually going to move things from A to B. It just means you were there when somebody else moved things from A to B. And so as I dug into the whole recruiting process, both participating initially recruiting folks, but then us actually running the recruiting for this large team, you very quickly realize, how do you filter through resumes that at the surface look really impressive? And yet most of these resumes that we would look at, most of these people, their resumes would focus on what it is I've done. I was here when this happened. Look at the brand names. Look how impressive it is. Why wouldn't you hire me? I worked at tier one company, tier one company, tier one company. I went to tier one business school, tier one undergrad. Why wouldn't you hire me? And yet the moment you start asking questions around, okay, what did you do? Yanni, what did you do to move the business from here to here? You very quickly realize that even if they were part of a team, they weren't establishing the strategy. They weren't actually acquiring the resources. They were basically the cleanup team that were told the cookbook recipe has been developed. Now your job is to actually just go and execute this. Well, that's not really interesting for Amazon. Amazon doesn't want blockers and tacklers. They want people who are going to figure out, to use the hockey expression, where the puck is going. What do we need to do in order to keep scaling our business? Because scaling from A to B and then scaling from B to C isn't necessarily quite the same path. But they also want people who are saying, what do we need to do to scale from A to M? Holy smokes, if we want to be 500 times bigger than we are today, that requires a whole different level of thinking. And I cannot tell you how many times I was in meetings where somebody would put some audacious goal up on the whiteboard. And the question was not, are you crazy? Like, are you nuts? We're never going to hit that goal. The question was always, whether we're going to hit that goal or not, what would need to be true for us to be in a position to actually hit that goal? I think back to like the 1960s. What will it take for us to put a man on the moon? Well, that's ridiculous. We're never going to do that. No, let's break down the problem. What will it actually take? Well, we'd need this and we'd need this, and then we'd need, this and this to work together, and then this and then this. Okay, well, let's start tackling those parts of the problem that we know we can solve today. We have the technology or we have the wherewithal to be able to figure out these problems. And then with the parts that we don't fully understand, what information do we need to go and find out so that we can peel back the onion and start to figure out more of what's going on? That type of intellectual adventure, solving seemingly impossible problems, for me, this is one of the most gratifying things I've ever done professionally, because you realize it's not about being successful or failing at the problem. By definition, the fact that you're working on the right problems and you're working with a bunch of other people who are also focused on, of course, this is possible. It seems impossible, but of course it's possible that collectively we're going to figure out how to solve even 80% of the problem. And maybe by the time we solve 80% of the problem, the other 20% will either be irrelevant or some business need will have slightly changed, but we will have learned so much to get to 80% of the solution that we will be a much better organization than we were if we had just said, hey, let's create a small marginal growth goal that really won't get us anywhere and will allow us to be trumped by some other company that comes along and says, we're thinking way bigger than you. So these are some of the really interesting things that I did at Amazon around thinking about solving big problems. If you spend your time focused on how do I work on small problems that are safe, that aren't going to get my career in, harm my career in most organizations, that's all very nice and well. But at Amazon, there's very few glorious failures. What there are lots of little failures where you learn really important things that will help guide the course correction you're gonna have to make in order to continue to figure out how to solve this big audacious goal. Really interesting stuff. Quite frankly, I think back to all the types of management consultants and bankers that I worked with who, they were all part of the top of their classes in business school. And yet I wish all of them had had a chance to work at Amazon for even 12 months, because you very quickly realize that just because we're smart in terms of, I know how to get good grades, I know how to, appear to be smart, that's not really the stuff that's important if you want to build something amazing. And Amazon has built all sorts of amazing things. And it's because they ask the right questions around what would it take for us to do this insane thing? Why bother going to Mars? Let's go to planets on another solar system. Well, okay, what's it going to take to do that? A, B, C, D, break down the problem. How do we solve each of those different subproblems? Really interesting experience. And I know I'm babbling here a little bit, but for me, the part of working at Amazon and being thrown in an environment where it wasn't so much you're being thrown in the deep end, but rather you're being thrown into a situation where the question is always why not? Not why, but why not? Why can't we go to a 500 times growth point? Why not? What's holding us back? Well, let's figure it out. Because it turns out you put smart people in a room, of course they all want to go and create insane growth. And they all want to, put a man on Mars, of course. But everyone wants to play it a little bit safe. Say, well, I don't really want to be part of a spectacular failure. The people Amazon hired, there's no such thing as a spectacular failure, as I say. It's about we're here to solve extraordinary problems, and we're here to figure out how to do things that nobody else has done. I think about so many of the companies that I either advised or I worked for, where the frame of reference was always your competitors. What am I doing relative to my competitors? How do I gain share from my competitors? At Amazon, I don't think I was ever in a conversation where people talked about the other companies. It was about what do we need to do in order to make customers so incredibly happy that naturally they'll flock to our platform. And if there are things that we need to do that nobody else has ever done, then let's do it. If we're trying to do things that other people have started to do, well, that's all very nice and well. At the end of the day, Amazon's going to find a way to scale or solve that big problem in ways that nobody else had, because there's the safety blanket of the culture that says, go solve big, audacious goals, go learn, go use data, go find ways that you're going to do things that no one else has done, but will be insanely rewarding once you get to those points.
So firstly, I wouldn't say that you were babbling. And if you were, it was inspirational babble, because I'm sitting here just listening, thinking, wow, if you set your trajectory to Pluto, then your fallback plan is landing on Mars. So if you're trying to solve the biggest problems that exist, then the lower hanging outcome is still going to be something exceptional. So
yeah,
it makes a whole lot of sense to me. And you caught my attention when you talked about the fact that you were inside of I guess the recruitment drive for one of the teams that you were working with inside of Amazon. And I read every book under the sun around professional development and entrepreneurship and all those things. And I'm really curious, from working inside of Amazon, from the perspective of sort of that people first, what was that experience like working inside of the recruitment drive? And what is your value that you would put toward the people that you bring in?
I worked with some pretty darn amazing colleagues at Amazon. Almost everybody was a type A personality. So at times it's, at the end of the day, you're exhausted because it's my idea versus your idea, your data versus my data. And at the end of the day, to become better at what I do, I need to be surrounded by people who are constantly pushing me. It's not a personal thing. It's a professional thing. And they're pushing me to think more clearly. At Amazon, I think back to my father is an incredibly bright man who's published dozens of books, thousands of articles, really, really smart guy. And he's an idea guy. He's always throwing ideas at me. And it was about a year and a half into my time at Amazon that I remember I was having a conversation with my father. And I said to him, Dad, it's not about whether your idea is a good idea or not. It's about whether your idea is one of the top 10 ideas and whether you've got the data to show that the opportunity available by solving that top 10 problem versus the other 10,000 ideas that are on paper that
So curious, just to jump back for a second. So, we're talking about the fact that, or the thing I guess that really interests me when you were going through, like I said, not babble, but it was inspiring and had me thinking a million miles an hour as to your time in the recruitment arm of the businesses that you supported inside of Amazon. What was the focus? What was the value? What was the, I guess, impact placed on people? Like, how central was that to the success of everything that you were looking to drive? And then after this, I want to talk a little bit about data.
So I'm really glad I worked in recruiting. And quite frankly, when I was asked to do this, I'm like, really? I don't want to work in recruiting. But I recognize that if you don't have the right people at the table, we're not going to solve big, audacious goals. We're just going to be a handful of people with big ideas and a bunch of followers who are saying, that's too hard. I don't want to work on that. But the other thing I learned about recruiting is if you bring the right type of people in, and by the way, Amazon is lots of articles have been written about Amazon's recruiting process, and it really does work. I'm really impressed by the likelihood of a culturally unfit person finding their way into Amazon is pretty darn slight. But here's the thing that I think about with recruiting. If you put the right kind of people at the table and everybody's saying, let's find a way to go to Pluto versus let's find a way to go from here to New York City, the reality is you're going to have a lot more interesting ideas show up on paper as people realize, well, we can go to Pluto, but also there's this other thing that we can also do that's big and audacious. And why can't we work on both of those? I'm going to tell you a little story. So my father is a very smart academic, published all sorts of stuff. And I talked to him regularly when I was at Amazon around some of these big ideas. How do we go find a way to do this and this and this? And my dad would throw ideas at me all the time and say, well, what about this? Have you thought about doing this or thought about doing this? And it was about a year into my time at Amazon that I explained to my dad, I said, it's not about whether your idea is a good idea or not. It's about, is it one of the top 10 ideas that's on the list for everybody in your department? And to be a top 10 idea, we're talking back in 2010, 2011, to be a top 10 idea, it was $1 billion idea within 2 years. It was not some puny little $100 million idea. It was $1 billion idea. And so I think I frustrated my father many times where he would give me an idea. I'm like, that's a great idea, Dad. That's $100 million idea. The problem is we need $1 billion ideas. So I'm going to take your $100 million idea. I'm going to write it down because things may change in the next few years. And that $100 million idea might become $1 billion idea if some external factor changes. But right now it's a $100 million idea, which means it's not going to make the cut. In most organizations, people will go gaga over a $100 million idea. At Amazon, nobody's excited. And so we do this recruiting process. We bring in people who are all fighting to come up with the next $1 billion idea. And we would go through this annual review process where everybody would write up what they thought was their biggest and best idea for the year. And then there was this big review process over a 3-4 day period. And to me, that was exhilarating, reading all these different ideas, realizing, wow, that's a really good idea. But it's only a $500 million idea. So you know what? That's going to get shelved. We may revisit it in 2 or 3 years, but sorry, guys, only a $500 million idea.
Just $500 million. No biggie.
So, but again, you have to congratulate people for saying, we've identified a really big idea. The market conditions may not be quite right for us to pursue it. But that results in Amazon having a laundry list of $500 million ideas ready to go. It's just that right now they're working on the $1 billion ideas. And so this is all about not only scaling your teams with the best people, but your best people had, which should be, at least the minimum caliber across the board should be so good that everyone's coming up with 100 million, 500 million, $1 billion ideas. And things will shake out in terms of whether your idea is actually big enough because of the market conditions, or whether it's a really clever idea, but we need to put a twist on it and combine it with something else to eventually make it a $1 billion idea. But for the time being, it's just a really smart idea with some things put together that don't quite get you to the $1 billion number. So no one ever said to me, that's about scaling. But the reality is that that's a form of scaling that I'd never seen before in any other kind of organization. Come up with ideas, make sure they're big. In fact, make sure they're so big and potentially have a vibrant impact on so many other parts of the existing business that the senior executives can't help but say, let's fund that. Let's move forward with that. So, that's part of the stuff I learned at Amazon that unfortunately I'd never learned in any of the other types of roles I had. And I worked for some big name companies where, smart people are supposed to go and work, but it was just never the culture of, we're here to do things that might seem unsafe from the potential of we may fail, versus unsafe. If we don't do this, someone else will figure it out and will beat us to Pluto. And then we got a much bigger problem, because now we have to not only go to Pluto, we got to go beyond Pluto. And we already know that getting to Pluto is going to be hard enough. We better aim, move quickly, and put the right people at the table to make sure that we can have a realistic chance of being successful.
So I mean, makes a whole lot of sense to me. And I'm sitting here, like I said, thinking, how do I apply this to the business? I'm thinking in my head right now with people that I have internally who are just literally solving problems that no one asked them to solve. They're going out there, and these are the people that you want to promote. We had one guy in our team, Jab, if you're listening to this, I love you. And he literally pitched us on building a team around, it's called the Kaizen team, constant improvement. He pitched us around the idea of building out a department in the business. And now we've given him 4 team members that he can now, where we've effectively invested in his commitment to building better data into our business. And so 2 questions for you before we move on to data, because this to me sounds like something that is likely a driving factor. And for businesses that are not as large as Amazon and some of the businesses you've worked with, I think it's one of those things that I think a lot of companies sort of move beyond and don't think too critically about actually making data-driven decisions. They more so look at, oh, well, this is working, so I'll keep pushing forward and growing organically, and here we go. But when you were talking about these $1 billion ideas, is that internal teams, they each present and then you review it once a year? Was that also part of the recruitment process?
We didn't ask, well, I don't remember asking candidates for $1 billion ideas, but we would ask them questions that were so grand in terms of the audaciousness of what we were asking them to solve. I really wasn't interested in whether they solved the problem or not. I was interested in, did they have the mental structure around how do you take a problem and break it down into various components and start solving each of those components, or at least start putting effort behind what are the key drivers that make this problem today unsolvable, and what would need to be possible for us to have a solution on this part, and a solution on this part, and a solution on this part. It's a wonderful feeling to be in an interview with someone and they immediately start breaking down the problem and classifying different types of parts of the issue. You realize I don't really care whether they get this or not. They understand conceptually that it's not about, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? We're never going to solve this problem. Why are you wasting my time asking me to solve this problem? Well, that's an easy way for people who otherwise have been in organizations at tier 1 companies. If they've played it safe all along, it's easy for them to say, I don't actually know how to solve this problem because I've never been forced to solve the problem or forced to think about the issue as to whether it's solvable or not is irrelevant. The issue at hand is, what do we need to know in order to be able to solve this problem? So we hired people where, there'd be 5 or 6 interviews of a candidate. And by the time the second interview is done, I mean, the folks who have interviewed the candidate, I mean, they're smiling because they're like, he or she, they get it. We want this person on the team. And what's really cool is often those people have never really been recognized as being really smart at solving seemingly vast, difficult to solve problems, because they've always been in a corporate environment where they've been asked to play along, go down the hall this way, only go this fast, do these things. And now we're giving them a situation where there is no hall. It's like a grand opening, great big, huge space. Your job is to figure out, how do we, if we're going to grab parts of the field, what parts of the field do we want to grab? How much of the field do we want to grab? How quickly do we want to grab it? It's very freeing for the candidates when they realize, oh my gosh, Amazon has this kind of environment. I can do this. I can be a mid-level manager and I can go solve, or at least come up with a solution to a problem that no one spent time thinking about, but I see the opportunity to solve. When you let someone become intellectually free around solving big, complicated problems, it's exhilarating. And there are days that I came home from Amazon where I was exhausted because, in a very satisfying way, I'd been in meetings with other people. We were solving problems where you have to sit back and say, are we looking at this with false assumptions or pretense around what is actually reality versus what is possible? When you start to say, I think we're going to build a 10-mile wide bridge across shark infested waters, and we're going to do it with paper mache, and it's doable, you're just like, wow, I figured something out that I don't think more than a handful of other people in the room have ever solved in the world. That's really exciting and makes you want to get up the next morning and go back to work. So that only comes because the room is full of other people who also have the guts to say, I want to work on problems that other people might see as frivolously ridiculous, but I recognize as, we need to start to think about how to solve this problem, at least parts of it, to get to a point where we actually understand the mechanism, the underlying mechanism, that much better.
And I think that seeing the passion and hearing the passion in your voice around what that is to be one of those people in the room solving some of the biggest problems, that no one else is even attempting to tackle, let alone solve itself. It sounds like, in the traditional corporate construct where you're sort of, caged is probably an over statement here, but you're sort of, you're swimming in your lane and you're focused. It is almost the antithesis of what it is to be an entrepreneur, to effectively live out that problem solving mechanism of how do I get to that big audacious goal, and how do I do it faster than anyone else? And that, for me personally, is probably the biggest driving factor. It's, I'm not going to make assumptions here about you, but I'll make a little bit of an assumption. I know for me, I'm not sitting here thinking about like, okay, what's the revenue I'm going to do tomorrow? How much money? It's what's the big problem that I'm going to solve that's going to enable everyone who I'm working with to solve that one thing that they couldn't do before, that we've now enabled it. And I think that a big part of that is probably back to that point around data. That's the driving mechanic of letting you understand, well, what's historically happened and where can we actually take it? So I guess I'm now rambling a little bit, but my question to you, and something that I've been meaning to ask about, is data. When you look at all the problems that you're looking to solve today, so let's talk buy box experts, for example.
Yeah.
You've come from a very data heavy decision making, effectively competing with other colleagues on, well, we both have the same access to this data set. This is the problem that I'm going to solve, and you're competing. How much has that DNA been woven into, all of the businesses that you've now either advised, invested, and built yourself?
Yeah. When we started Prosper Show, when Joe and I started Prosper Show, we knew we were trying to solve a problem that was worth solving. And then the problem at the time was, how do you create an educational conference for large sellers who are tired of being sold to? I'd been to lots of conferences where, quite frankly, it was just a big sales pitch, the whole conference, or there really wasn't very much educational content. There were speakers, but it really wasn't educational content. And Prosper turned out to be very successful, and we had thousands of people come to the events. And quite frankly, we didn't know what we were doing, but we figured it out. Everybody got their chicken sandwich and lots of great education, and it went well. But what we realized quickly was we didn't have the context to go find 1,500 people a year to come to our show. So we had to start to break down the problem. Where are these leads going to come from? How are we going to get these leads? Well, we can do it this way and this way and this way and this way. We started to test a couple of different approaches, and some of them we realized, oh, this is totally going to work. So we need to double down on this. And these other areas, even though they may not necessarily be the best approach, what else can we learn from trying this out in other ways and see if we can get more people to attend? And what's important to understand here is there was no database that we went to and said, slice and dice the data differently, we'll find our answer. It was around saying, we have a big problem to solve that we recognize we can't solve just by calling some people we already know. We're going to have to figure this out. And by recognizing there's approach A, B, C, D, E, what do we need to do for each of those approaches, and breaking it down, that's a form of compiling data and saying, we're going to test things here, test things here, test things here. What are we testing so we can collect data, collect input around whether this is going to work or not? That's all about this need to collect data drives the need to innovate and try things that are a little bit outside of the realm of what you have to do every day. And so to the extent that, here I am now running an agency, and we used to struggle with hiring 2 or 3 people. Now we're hiring more than a dozen a month. And so the question around, how do we build a scalable process? How do we find these people? How do you find good people to work in your company? How do you do that in a COVID world where everybody wants the same types of people? Well, again, it's a problem of we have to look at lots of different opportunities. We have to say, what do we need to learn about each of these different channels to figure out whether or not this thing is actually going to work? And that's about collecting data, being willing to do lots of little experiments and say, I've learned enough to say, this looks like we should keep moving forward, or we actually have learned enough that we don't want to go down this path and let's reinvest our assets somewhere else. So I don't build big databases anymore. I don't go and have access to huge databases anymore. But the way problems are solved has to be around looking at ways to collect data. How do I collect data about different ideas so that I can figure out whether these things make sense or not? I worked for one company at one point where it was the antithesis of data collection. It was all about who you knew. Well, go talk to Bob because Bob knows how to do it, i.e. Bob supposedly has the answer to the question. And if Bob says, do it my way, and then it'll work, then you'll have success. Well, it turns out the world is ever changing. And to everybody out there who's the Bob, it doesn't mean that you're going to continue to be the most relevant way to solve the problem. And so how do you continue to find questions that need to be asked, where data needs to be collected, so you can further test, does the mechanism still work the way we think it works? How do I collect the data to get the feedback so that I can course correct and figure out how can I move forward faster or more efficiently? That's really what we do today on so many different fronts. It's not running regression models. It's not building big data databases. It's about asking the right questions and being prepared that 50% of what we do is not going to be successful in the sense that this is not the answer we had been hoping for, but we learned enough along the way that we're now in a better position to say, we know why this didn't work. And that's actually useful to know so that we don't repeat it over here, basically put a new coat of paint on it and call it something new when it's in fact the same underlying mechanism. So it's a frame of mind that says we have to innovate around doing experiments. We have to do experiments and try things out specifically to collect data, to learn about our environment more effectively and be in a better position to be able to say, we actually think we know what the environment looks around us because we continue to test the outer bounds of what we think our underlying assumptions are.
Yeah, I mean, this is ringing true to everything I'm doing. But if we were to take it down, a few levels to a something a little bit more tangible, and what I mean by that is, for example, like with us, I think like you, we run a lot of what we do inside of Multiply Me in a Scala. Everything's backed by data. We pull from our HubSpot, we pull from HubSpot, we pull from Crelate, which is our recruitment CRM. We take in Xero, we build analytics dashboards based on performance, where things sit, where are the bottlenecks, where are the challenges. We iterate, we continue to sort of break down the information better to make better, more micro-focused decisions on, okay, well, if we make this little course correction deviation, then we can fix that problem. And the next bit of the funnel is, that creates an issue here. And so you're constantly iterating. But we also run, weekly, we run on EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. Yeah, I'm seeing you nod your head. So no surprise to me that you're all over that. So, we have our L10, our level 10 meeting every week. We have the 90-minute meeting. We go through and we look at what are the core challenges in the business this week? How do we solve them? How do we bring the senior management team together? So for you, in everything that you're doing day to day, I mean, you're a 200-person strong agency. What mechanics exist in your business to sort of help, for businesses maybe smaller than yours, or, the people listening today, like, what are some of the insights that they might be able to draw upon to start to build the data sets they need to make better decisions?
Having a centralized CRM system for your clients, whether that's the HubSpot or Salesforce or whatever tool, investing in something like that was one of the most important things we ever did. Not just because there was a centralized tool where all the information sat, but we could train people to all put information into this the same way. Well, it turns out once you have a centralized source of data, then it's easier for managers to go in and pull data and say, oh, we've got some weird variances here that we need to address. And it becomes easier to say, can we do cost modeling and figure out, are we in fact in a situation we've got a bunch of customers who cost us more money than we thought? We started doing, time management costing tools, and that was really, really useful. And we discovered we thought certain types of customers were inefficient, but now we have data to say, oh yeah, yep, we're not doing this. When a client says, I need you to do a bunch of extra free stuff for me, say, sorry, not interested. And the ability for us to start saying no to clients around, we're actually not interested in renewing your contract. I'm sorry, but when was the last time a growing agency said, we're actually going to shun a bunch of revenue? Well, it turns out until you have the data, the cost data, where you're tracking who's doing what for clients, till you have that kind of information, you could find yourself with a book of business that you think is glorious, but in fact, you're underwater having all these types of clients. So centralizing the data on who we're talking to as prospects, who we've signed, who people are within those client organizations, and then the cost information about each of those clients. Those were two of the most important steps we made so that we could focus on running properly towards certain prospects and running away from certain prospects or running away from certain types of work. That was extremely important for us. And quite frankly, too many years went by before we got our act together and wrote those checks to get those software tools in place.
And I think that's really common for most people. Like we're in a position now where we're, and this is the game we play. We're bootstrapped. We're almost over-indexing on building out teams around the data before we have the number of clients to back those decisions, because we know the importance of making those good decisions. So it's that balance. But I think that too many companies, and you know what, I'll say particularly inside of the Amazon space as an FBA seller, Amazon is one of the great companies in our lifetime. And it's so good that it enables growth at a scale for FBA sellers that, isn't really possible in almost any other ecosystem in an environment. So getting ahead of those decisions early and almost over-indexing on the data-driven decisions as you get to $2 and $3 and $5 and $15 million is going to absolutely set you up for, an accurate growth trajectory versus, oh shit, I've got no growth capital anymore to invest into inventory. I've got 6 people, one person who's 25, he's worth $130,000 out of Amazon just because he worked at Amazon. Before you know it, you're growing, but you're not scaling. You're not getting to a point where you're actually, the profit in the business is growing. You're just simply growing the revenue, and it's a sort of a diminishing returns as a business. So I think that, to your point, those data-backed decisions, investing in the tools that are going to enable you to give you that level of visibility to make better decisions, and saying no. I mean, there is, there is not much, there's not a better feeling in the world where you're at a position where you can say no to a client because you know that it's going to be a headache for your team, and it's not really it's just not a right fit for you and for them. And so, making those decisions and having the data to back it is a pretty special moment, I think, in any business's, any business's lifetime.
All right. Right. Well, it's also a point where you realize, for better or for worse, we're now at a point that we can be picky. And when you're a startup company, it's easy to believe that you can't be picky. You got to take all the business that comes your way. The moment you can start to be picky, you have a much better sense of who you are, what you're good at doing, what you're not good at doing, and who the types of companies are that you ultimately want to be working with. Many years ago, I was a general consultant. As a general consultant, your job is to say yes to anybody who shows up with money in hand. And the moment you realize that I can afford to not say yes to everyone, but also it's irresponsible of me to say yes to everyone, that becomes a glorious thing. One of the best things that I have learned as a professional is the more we learn how to say no, and the more we are able to actually say, we have a clearer sense of what our strategy is. Strategy is about making choices. And yet, as an agency, as a consultant, we often don't make enough choices because we're just trying to pay the bills. But once we get good enough that we can say no, what we're doing is we're being true to our strategy. And all too often, it takes too long before you are actually true to your strategy. You put down something on paper that says, this is our strategy of who we're going after, what we're going to do. And then somebody comes along and says, I'll give you money to do something different. And you're like, okay, because variance can't be that bad. Well, variance is terrible. And as soon as you learn that, as soon as you realize that you have to say no sometimes in order to be true to your company, true to your employees, true to the types of training you have or haven't given them, that's a very, very important part of learning how to scale, is saying no.
Wow. I've got to say, James, just sitting here, I'm leaving inspired. I had some pivotal decisions to make about exactly the topics you talk about right now. There's some amazing opportunities that are sort of sitting in the wings right now, but it's a deviation from the strategy. And so even though, the money...
That's your $100 million idea. Put it aside.
Yeah.
It's a good idea, but not for right now.
And that's spot on. That is spot on. So do you know what? I know that we're getting to the end here. So I want to be respectful of your time. And firstly, I want to thank you for taking the time to sit with me. I've loved every minute. And, I'm sure those listening at home will gain, as much as I have from, just the wisdom and the insights about what it takes at some of the biggest companies and the most hyper growth business, in our lifetime. Being a part of that would have been an incredible experience, and being able to share that wisdom. For anyone that might want to get in touch with you, leverage iBox experts. I mean, I know that you're no longer, you're connected maybe to the Prosper Show, which I'll hopefully be attending. So hopefully see you there in the flesh. It'll be nice to get around people. But what would be the best way to find out about any of the million solutions you're attached to and leverage them?
I am definitely active on LinkedIn, James Thomson on LinkedIn. You can also find me at james@buyboxexperts.com. So thank you, Yanni, for having me. This has been a pleasure. I look forward to doing this again.
Likewise. Well, I would love to have you on again. So you just wait and I'll be following up with you soon.
All right. Thank you. Take care.